Think back to a scorching July afternoon in 1977. You're packed into the family station wagon with your siblings, windows down because the air conditioning gave out somewhere near Toledo. The closer you get to Sandusky, the more the anticipation builds. Then you see it, the peak of the Blue Streak wooden roller coaster rising above the trees. And you know you've arrived, Cedar Point, the greatest amusement park in America. For generations of families across the Midwest, Cedar Point wasn't just an amusement park, it was the summer pilgrimage, the reward for enduring the school year, the place where childhood memories were made, teenage romances bloomed, and parents pretended they weren't terrified on roller coasters just to impress their kids. But the Cedar Point of the 1970s was a completely different place than the mega resort it is today. It was simpler, smaller, and in many ways more magical. There were no 400-foot-tall coasters, no fast-pass systems or $15 funnel cakes, just a beautiful peninsula jutting into Lake Erie, a handful of legendary rides, and the pure, uncomplicated joy of a summer day at the best amusement park most people had ever seen. The journey to Cedar Point was half the adventure. Families from Cleveland, Toledo, Detroit, and Columbus would wake up before dawn, pack coolers full of sandwiches and pop, and hit the road. The anticipation built with every mile. Kids pressed their faces against the windows, watching for that first glimpse of the coasters. When you finally turned onto the Cedar Point Causeway, crossing over Sandusky Bay, with the park spread out ahead of you, it felt like entering another world. Parking was chaos, a massive gravel lot where attendants in white shirts directed thousands of cars into loosely organized rows. You'd park, and your dad would look around, trying to memorize landmarks so you could find the car later. There was no fancy tram system. You walked, sometimes for what felt like miles in the July heat, but nobody complained because Cedar Point was waiting. The entrance in the 1970s was nothing like the Grand Plaza of today. It was modest, almost quaint. You'd walk through the gates and immediately smell it. That distinctive Cedar Point aroma that every visitor remembers. Suntan lotion, fried food, popcorn, cotton candy, and the faint metallic smell of the lake breeze. That smell meant summer. It meant freedom. One of the biggest differences between Cedar Point then and now was how you paid for rides. There were no wristbands giving you unlimited access. Instead, you bought ticket books. These were booklets of lettered tickets, A, B, C, D, and E, with each letter corresponding to different levels of rides. The E tickets were for the big coasters and major attractions. The A tickets were for gentle rides like the carousel or the antique cars. This system created a unique economy. You had to ration your tickets, deciding which rides were worth the precious E tickets and which could wait. Running out of tickets meant either buying more, which was expensive, or settling for the smaller rides. It made every big coaster ride feel valuable, not something you could do 10 times in a row, just because the line was short. The rides themselves were iconic, though nothing like the extreme machines of today. The Blue Streak, which opened in 1964, was the park's signature coaster throughout the early 70s. It was a classic wooden roller coaster, rickety, loud, and absolutely terrifying in the best possible way. The cars clacked up the lift hill, and you could hear the screams from the parking lot. Riding the Blue Streak was a rite of passage. If you could handle that, you could handle anything. Then in 1976, everything changed. Cedar Point installed the corkscrew, and it was revolutionary. This wasn't just any coaster. It was the first in the world to have 3 inversions. 3 times your world turned upside down, your feet dangling in the air, stomach lurching in that perfect mix of terror and exhilaration. The corkscrew's iconic loops became the symbol of the park, visible from the causeway, gleaming white against the blue sky. In 1978, the Gemini arrived, and it was massive. A racing coaster with 2 tracks, red and blue, where trains competed side by side. Riders would lean out. Safety standards were looser then, and high-five people on the opposite train as they raced. The Gemini was the tallest, fastest coaster in the world when it opened, and riding it felt like flying. But Cedar Point in the 70s wasn't just about roller coasters. The park had a dual identity. It was both an amusement park and a beach resort, and the beach was just as important as the rides. A wide stretch of sandy beach ran along Lake Erie, and on hot days, thousands of people spread out towels, swam in the cold lake water, and soaked up the sun. Families would spend the morning on rides, then migrate to the beach for the afternoon to cool off. The beach culture of 1970s Cedar Point is almost completely forgotten today. The lake was colder than anyone wanted, but you swam anyway, shrieking as the waves hit. Teenagers played volleyball. Kids built sandcastles. Parents napped under umbrellas. It was a legitimate beach vacation, not just a side attraction to the rides. The boardwalk along the beach was lined with game booths and food stands. The games were classic carnival fare: ring toss, balloon darts, shooting galleries. The prizes were oversized stuffed animals that you'd lug around the park all day as a badge of honor, even though they cost your dad 3 times what they were worth. But winning one felt like an Olympic achievement. Food at 1970s. Cedar Point was simple and gloriously unhealthy. Corn dogs, French fries, cotton candy, caramel apples, funnel cakes dusted with powdered sugar. The Midway Market was the main restaurant, serving burgers, hot dogs, and fried chicken on plastic trays. You'd eat outside at picnic tables, fighting off seagulls that swooped down to steal French fries. A full meal for a family of 4 might cost $10. A Coke was 25 cents. Prices were reasonable enough that parents didn't panic every time a kid asked for a snack. The layout of the park was more compact and navigable. You could walk from one end to the other in 15 minutes. The iconic Sky Ride, a ski lift-style gondola system, gave you a bird's-eye view of the whole park. Riding the Sky Ride was peaceful, a chance to rest your feet and see everything spread out below. You'd spot your family on the beach or point out the coasters you'd conquered. The Midway was lined with shade trees, something largely lost in today's version of the park. On brutally hot days, those trees were salvation. You'd sit in the shade, eat an ice cream cone, and watch the parade of humanity pass by. Families with strollers, teenagers in bell-bottoms and tube tops, older couples holding hands. Everyone sunburned, everyone smiling. Live entertainment was a big part of the park. There were dolphin shows at the aquatic stadium, where trained dolphins jumped through hoops and did flips. The trick ski show on the lagoon featured water skiers building human pyramids and jumping off ramps. The shows were corny and wonderful, and everyone clapped enthusiastically when they ended. The park also had a genuine frontier town section, complete with a saloon, jail, and staged gunfights. Cowboys and outlaws would have dramatic shootouts in the street, firing blanks and falling dramatically. Kids watched wide-eyed, believing every second of it. You could pan for gold in a wooden sluice box and keep whatever shiny pebbles you found. One of the most beloved attractions was the turnpike cars, little gasoline-powered cars on a guided track. They looked like 1920s roadsters, and you could drive them around a scenic route. For kids, it felt like genuine driving, even though the cars were locked on a rail. The smell of exhaust mixed with the lake breeze, and you'd honk the horn at everyone you passed. At night, Cedar Point transformed. The rides lit up with thousands of colored bulbs. The beach emptied, and everyone converged on the Midway. The sound of calliope music from the carousel mixed with screams from the coasters and the bells and buzzers from the game booths. The park stayed open until 11 p.m. or midnight, and the nighttime rides were somehow more thrilling in the dark. The walk back to the parking lot at the end of the night was exhausted and bittersweet. Feet hurt, sunburn stung. Younger kids were asleep on Dad's shoulders, but everyone was happy. The drive home was quiet, the radio playing softly, everyone too tired to talk, replaying the day's highlights in their minds. For working-class families across the Midwest, Cedar Point was affordable magic. A day at the park, admission, food, tickets, might cost $50 for a family. It wasn't cheap, but it was doable. Most families went once or twice a summer, and it was the highlight of the season. Some families splurged and stayed at the Hotel Breakers, the grand old hotel right on the beach. Others drove home the same day, exhausted but unwilling to pay for a hotel. The 1970s were a golden age for Cedar Point. The park was evolving from a regional attraction to a nationally recognized destination. It was making bold moves, the corkscrew, the Gemini, that pushed the boundaries of what roller coasters could be. But it hadn't yet lost the relaxed, beachy, family-friendly atmosphere that made it feel like a vacation, not just a thrill ride endurance test. Compare that to today's Cedar Point. The park now has 17 roller coasters, including some of the tallest and fastest in the world. The beach still exists but is almost an afterthought. Prices have skyrocketed. A single-day ticket costs over $70, parking is $30, and a basic meal can easily run $20 per person. The ticket books are long gone, replaced by all-day wristbands and complicated fast-pass systems. The modern park is bigger, more advanced, more extreme, but it's also more expensive, more crowded, and more exhausting. The simplicity is gone. You can't just wander the midway and decide what to ride next. You need a strategy, a map, an app on your phone telling you wait times. It's impressive, but it's not the same. The 1970s Cedar Point existed in a sweet spot. It was advanced enough to have world-class coasters, but still intimate enough to feel personal. You could actually do everything in one day. You could afford to go multiple times a summer. You could spend half your time on the beach and not feel like you were missing out. The people who went to Cedar Point in the 1970s carry those memories like treasures. The feeling of cresting the first hill on the Blue Streak, the shock of the corkscrew's first loop, the cold shock of Lake Erie water, the taste of that first bite of cotton candy, the exhausted, satisfied feeling of walking back to the station wagon under the stars. Cedar Point is still there, still thrilling millions of visitors every year. But the park that existed in the 1970s, the one that was as much beach resort as amusement park, where ticket books made you choose your rides carefully, where a family could spend a full day for $50. That park is gone. It lives only in memory, in faded photographs, and in the stories told by parents and grandparents who still remember when the Blue Streak was the scariest ride imaginable, and a day at Cedar Point was the best day of summer. For one magical decade, Cedar Point was exactly what America needed it to be. Affordable, exciting, accessible, and unforgettable. It was the place where childhood happened, where summers were defined, and where memories were made that would last a lifetime. That's the Cedar Point we remember. That's the Cedar Point we miss.